Please hold whilst we connect you. We connect you. We connect you. We connect you. We connect you.
You're listening to a Redacted special episode as part of Melbourne Design Week in May 2025. In collaboration with RMIT and sponsored by Better Future and X-Frame, we hosted FUTUREPROOF, a 3-day event showcasing amazing local designs and nightly talks from leading industry experts. The talk you're listening to now is by Andrew Simpson, Design Director and founder of Vert Industrial Design House.
The topic of my talk is designing for post-Silicon Valley, reimagining a world we want to live in. I'm Andrew Simpson. I'm the founder and director of Vert. We're an industrial design house. We design work for clients, but also own products. At any one time, I'm bringing to market 4 or 5 products that we've designed, got some intellectual property for, formed a company around, and then taken to market. And I've done that the last 20 years. Some great successes, some horrible failures, and a whole bunch that are coming through at the moment. I employ an amazing team of designers. There's 15 of us. Everyone's an industrial designer. I sometimes think it's like one of those Eddie Murphy movies where he plays every character. You look around, there's industrial designer doing accounts receivable, and there's industrial designer doing workshop maintenance or something. At Vert Design, it's about nudging the world into a better direction. We're driven to create a world we want to live in, one where design lends dignity to human experience and is grounded in empathy and sustainability. But some of our core values are sustainability and aspiration. I sort of wonder about that term. I think aspiration doesn't mean we're copping out and we're never going to get there. It just acknowledges that sustainability always changes, that something can be less harm and then you solve for it and then you create a new harm and you have to solve for it again. So it's acknowledging that it's a continually moving bit of work. So sustainability and aspiration. Believe in progressive experimentation, and experimentation's always been a huge part of the work that we do. We experiment with materials, practices. I'll show a little bit about that later on. People are at the core of what we do and believe in growing opportunities. A couple of years ago, I had to do a big round of employing designers and I really got a chance to think about what are designers and what do we want. And I came up with this thing that the best designers are curious, they're optimistic, and they're willing to help. And I love it because when I look around and see designers that are thriving, they have these 3 characteristics that you can identify. And when one of them's gone, I watch people struggle in their career. If they're no longer curious about the world, they start to become a bit cynical. If they're no longer optimistic, and if they're not willing to help, it's difficult to work with. And so I'm lucky that my team, they're all curious, optimistic, and willing to help. I've got heaps of stuff I want to say, and I've got lots of graphs that I've made to try to say them. The thing I'm going to try to say again and again in lots of different ways is that all designers have a worldview, and the application of that worldview is evident in the work that they do. A lot of designers don't scrutinize and examine their worldview, and they operate out of a reflective place. And it's partly the nature of our profession. That's where we fit within the ecosystem. But I think at the moment, it's critically important that we have a strong worldview, we understand it, and we're able to articulate them clearly. So there is concentric circles that talk about the way in which I might think about problems that we have in the world. And we think about them in the legal. The legal is what you have to do. If you have a job, you're legally responsible to deliver the contract that you've promised your client. But then we have the ethical, and I think about the ethical as the rules and codes that bind our profession together. And then I think about the moral is a sphere above that, which is our personal beliefs and responsibilities. This idea of the legal, the ethical, and the moral flow down into our worldview, and then a client or we bring a problem to it. There's a design intervention, and then there's a product-based solution. Lots of graphs explaining what industrial designers do to non-designers. I've got to explain it to architects, to business people. So I use a lot of these descriptors to do it. But I think this one is one that I think best represents the way in which I approach, or the studio approaches design. Is we have 2 pillars. We're interested in humans and we're interested in the technical. On the human side, we're interested in the cultural relevance of an object. How did we get here? What's the history that led us to the point where we're using it? We're interested in how people respond to objects, their perceived needs, their hopes and dreams and status and things that get higher up on the Maslow's hierarchy, user experience. And on the other side, we're interested in mechanical properties, functional attributes, what something's made of, how it's made, its efficiencies, and the final engineering and the documentation and all that. I think it's critical to our profession that we do both of these in equal measure. If I was interested in human factors only, would be an artist or in marketing or only interested in technical requirements would be engineers, or maybe engineers would probably hate to hear that said, but I think it's this balance between the two. I made this a couple of weeks ago and I'm really happy with it. It's really neat and I think it's true. So I meet a lot of creative professionals who tell me that they're strategists. They've been graphic designers for 20 years and now they're a brand strategist, or they've been head of product faculty within a business and now they're product strategists. I've had to look at what the definition of strategy is, and I really don't think anything that I do in design is strategy. And that strategy is taking the shortest 5-year worldview, the longest 30-year worldview. It's thinking really broadly about where something's going. And most of the work in which we do is tactics. A client comes to us and they say, I would like to make a new microgreen fogponics system. And I think if I do that, I'm going to have growing market share in an emerging market. And that's their strategy. And then they go, the problem is execution. They go, I need some to sell. And industrial design really nicely bridges this gap between the strategy and the execution. And I think between the strategy and the tactics are these human factors. That's thinking like what needs to be in the world. That's your personas. And then between the tactics and the execution are these technical factors. And I love that because we're going back and forth between the two. We get to knit this thing together. That's why our profession produces such great outcomes. And I think that ability to be based in the human and the machine gives us this broad range of possibilities. This is just a shot from the website. Here's a model of an ant farm that's shown in a German art gallery. Sample pots for Mecca Cosmetica. They're rolling out 4.5 million of them to all the stores in Australia. They're made from recycled plastic. We've built a closed loop recycling thing for them. We make them in northern beaches and take them back and then remake them. There's like electric vehicle chargers. There's consumer products. We do a lot of the furniture for the Sydney Metro and the Western Sydney Airport. We did wearable spoons for Oz Harvest. In my body of work, I've done rectal plugs for sheep and helped on valves for artificial hearts. There's things that are one-off artwork worth $500,000 and things that are 5 cents. And I think that all of them have these two commonalities to them. They're meaningful to people, and then the manufacturing and how they're made is critical. So what is Silicon Valley? Silicon Valley is a place in California. It was a place to start with, is now really an idea and a methodology or a mindset. And when I originally thought about Silicon Valley, I think about this inevitable progression. And this is not that old, but this is my lifetime. I had rotary phones, and then you get a Motorola, and then there was flip phones, and then there was smart-enabled Palm Pilots and Blackberries, and we end up in smartphones. And it feels like a continual progression and an inevitable path to modernity. We can break it up into 3 very clear phases. I chose these 3 quotes just to think a little bit about where we're up to and how we might need to rethink what's happening. The first era of Silicon Valley was Buckminster Fuller, a legend. You've all studied Buckminster Fuller, I'm sure. And I love this quote from him because he says, "We are called to be the architects of the future, not its victims. There is nothing in a caterpillar that tells you it's going to be a butterfly. And the earth is like a spaceship that didn't come with an operation manual." And if I think about the poetry of the language, the type of unrefined concepts or undescribed concepts that he's talking about, it really represents this counterculture era of Silicon Valley. A whole Earth catalogue. It's now online. You can have a look at it. It's amazing. It was the first time that people had stopped and seen the Earth from afar, and they could see the entire Earth in one sitting. And it really was a critical moment that changed the way people thought about their responsibility to what they made. And then we think about, probably most people think about Silicon Valley as the Steve Jobs era. We call it mass culture era of Silicon Valley. This is one of the ways that I believe people express their appreciation to the rest of humanity is to make something wonderful and put it out there. And then the third era of Silicon Valley, we've been calling the oligarchy era, which is the tech bro oligarchy. I found this Netflix quote pretty quickly. The guy says, "At Netflix, we're competing with our customers' time. So our competitors include Snapchat, YouTube, Sleep, etc." Before I was talking about the human and the machine. When I think about the counterculture era of Silicon Valley, I think it's this much human and this much machine. And then you get to this mass culture era of Silicon Valley and it's 50-50. They want to leave a lasting imprint on humanity to express their admiration. And they're going to do it with these great devices. And then over here, it's going to believe our customers are sleeping instead of using our product. And so you can see this is all tech, no people. So where to from here? everyone approaches design from a worldview. Great designers are able to articulate, scrutinize, and revise their own worldview. And so I think when I look at this, I can see very evident worldviews that are expressed between what's been said and also the products that are produced and what effect they have on the broader society. So how do we create a worldview? So I've come up with this broadly because I hate setting goals in the business. And everyone tells you have to have goals. And I say, I don't necessarily believe in goals. I think they're too subjective. But I do believe that our identity frames the way in which we behave in most of our situations. That behavior then produces our outcome, which then affects our environment, reaffirms our identity. And we can broadly call that a worldview. How do we see ourselves? How do we see our role in the world? How does that then affect how we behave and interact in different situations? Will affect our outcomes, which will reaffirm and engage with how we see the world. Design has the power to reimagine and create the world we want to live in. When I graduated as a designer, I was always taught that design could change behavior. And I struggled with it a lot because I couldn't find all that many examples. And I narrowed it down to say, design can remind you of behavior that we already want to change. And I use the example of periodically decide I need to do better drawings. And so I go and buy a nice sketchbook and a pen. And the pen reminds me that I really would like to be more considered with my drawings again. But if I have no interest in doing better drawings, the pen and the book have no effect whatsoever. And I think it's the same with this power of design to reimagine the world we want to live in. I think at the moment we have a massive deficit in the ability to imagine alternates to what we've got at the moment. I think it's a number of things where people are under a lot of pressure, the effects of a Silicon Valley worldview that have crammed a lot of things to us and stolen our focus or distracted our thinking, and this combined effect that everything is knowable and recordable and searchable means that we're haunted by ideas that were had in the past and we're not able to spend the time to develop ideas for the future. And I think that everyone at the moment is locked into the way it is. We think that the current ways in which we're consuming and producing and the societal structures we have are inevitable and inherent. And designers who should be doing the work of imagining the worlds we want to live in aren't. And partly it's because this thing that we're tactical, we're not strategic. We don't step back and think about these 30-year worldviews. We're thinking about these things right in front of us. But I think it's actually we're some of the only people that can do this. And it's partly this curious, optimistic, willing to help. It's also partly that we have this ability to go between the human and the technical, which allows for new things to exist. And it's a problem. And as I said, this talk's not easy because I don't necessarily have any great answers for this. This is not a very glamorous project, but it taught me a lot. This is the wonderful little suitcase company. We've designed these little suitcases that mums or parents can give to their kids to take to the coffee shop or if they're getting their hair cut, and the kids can fold it out and play. And so this came because we were working with a speech therapist, and she said children were presenting to her not being able to talk properly. So they had delayed speech. And I've made this up a bit, but I think it's a nice analogy or a nice metaphor for it. So speech is a complex human function. It takes a lot of background development for speech to occur. And so I use this analogy of a plant, that you want the flower, and flower is speech, but to get speech, you've got to have fine motor skill, you've got to have tactile development, you've got to have inner dialogue, you've got to have the development of the larynx. And so all these things that go up into then getting the flower at the top. And so it's a telltale. And so what I identified was there was kids on devices, they've been on smartphones and tablets, weren't developing fine motor skills. They weren't having to pick up and interact with small objects. They weren't experiencing different textures. And also the way in which they played was very isolating and didn't encourage others to join them. And it's just a little suitcase, but I think it became a real focal point for me on this idea of where we've gotten to with a Silicon Valley worldview and what some of those answers might look like. So what was the Silicon Valley worldview? It says technology has unlimited potential, computers are the bicycle of the mind. And then the design intervention is I'd like to navigate the web using a device that feels like a slate of glass. We end up with a product-based solution. So we end up with a new problem, screen time and smart media, resulting in delayed speech in young children. And so our worldview that we brought into this was the importance of tactility and physicality, storytelling and early childhood development. And I've tried to make pithy little statements to say it. It's hard to break down a worldview, but it says humans are the same as they've always been. We evolved 200,000 years ago on the plains of Africa. Take a human from 100,000 years ago and put them today, you can't tell the difference. Genetically, we're the same, we're as intelligent. And so there's all of this evolutionary drivers and imperatives that are behind us that we're forgetting and washing out at the moment. And we want to go back to some of those to help improve kids' speech. The other one I want to talk about was Dresden optics, and then I use a couple of other glass examples to show how a changing worldview affects the outcomes of the work we do. I love this Dresden business. It was Bruce Jeffries, the guy from Go Get Cars, a proper entrepreneur. Do you mean? I think if we think about entrepreneurs, we might think about a Silicon Valley entrepreneur. He was different. When he started Go Get Cars, he lived in Balmain, and he goes, I hate having a car. Wouldn't it be nice if we could share a car? So he wrote a leaflet. He went around and dropped it in every letterbox of his neighbours and said, I'm going to have a meeting at the town hall. And 80 people turned up to the meeting at the town hall. And he said, hey, if I buy a car, will you all chip in and we can share it? And he did that. And then that was Go Get Cars. You think about that, like that's half human, half machine. He thinks about the people and understands their needs and then thinks about how we might deliver it. So he took the same approach to this Dresden optics. He said, I think glasses is a lie. Is that the whole optics business, why am I paying $500 for glasses? There can't be that much cost in them. And his brief to us with this was he said, look, just look at glasses for us. And he said, can you make glasses out of corn chips? And we really quickly landed on injection molded glasses. But from that, there was a heap of worldview that went into it. Effectively, we're looking at Luxottica. They've got 60% of the market, 6% of the US, is more in Australia. And so they provide individuality and luxury to the masses. And that's the worldview in which they're producing. As Swiss said, there was price gouging in eyewear and they're putting a price on good vision. And so this worldview we brought into it is that individuality and luxury on the face and status and brand on the face is not for everyone. That's a dominant worldview from somewhere that's being pushed down. And we hypothesized that there's a whole bunch of people that would be more comfortable if things were uniform. And if they didn't have to worry about it and compete with it and they go, I've just got a face, I just need some glasses. And that was the hunch we took with it. And then that worldview then led us down to make one style only, injection mold them. You get all the cost benefit from injection molding them. And when we started, we sold a 10-pack for $200. So previously, individual pair was $300, you get a 10-pack. And once you've got a 10-pack of glasses, you think completely differently about how you interact with them. That clarity we created around this comfort in uniformity then became the driver that helped push it forward. And so I just thought, look, we've done lots of glasses and we've actually done hundreds, but here's 5 points that talk about how a changing worldview change how we approach the thing, the glass design. So the first one we did with 3D printed glasses, and it was a love of the technology. We go, there's a new machine, there's a new tool. How do we make it meaningful? How do we make it exciting? So we ended up with these 3D printed glasses. We then did a whole range of them and sold them. So Dresden Optics come in, and this is this comfort through uniformity. It's also about efficiency. We produce them locally, made from recycled materials. They allow for updatability. If you take them back, they'll repair them. A whole bunch of really good things that went into that. And then I did the Good Citizen glass a couple of years ago. They're made from PET, and it's directly a project about adaptive reuse. So saying, how we have a waste product, how can we produce a meaningful outcome from the waste product? And that's a lot of, when I talked about, do a lot of experimentation work in the studio, it's generally in that. It's saying, how do you make a meaningful outcome for a waste product? We did recently this Four Eyes Vision, which now has a new name that I can't remember. And that was the co-design working with communities in Papua New Guinea and optometrists to be able to take these pre-formed frames up into remote locations so optometrists could shape them to a face and pop glasses into them. And then just recently I've done this Sunglass Fix, which is made from recycled glasses. So it's a company that services and produces glasses, and we're using their discarded glasses to then remake new glasses as a proper circular economy. But I also really wanted to include the Sunglass Fix one because I worked with the team at Catapult on this. And I think it's a really key part in terms of this new worldview that we need to create is what we're calling a community of practice, is that we can't make any meaningful change or imagine and create and push a worldview without there being a community of practice. And I think that was a really key part to that project, was working in and amongst other designers. Also, just showing some of these glasses. They're the Scott Ottos. There's the Dresdens, and there's the Good Citizens. Because it is a design talk as well, to say we invented new hinges and new IP for each of these, and it's really hard. So it's like the way in which we had to solve for the 3D printed glasses was with this hinge, and then that hinge was gave to Dresden for their IP. But then when Good Citizens came along, you had to make a downgraded material because the recycled material has been downgraded. It doesn't have the same elastic properties. And then imagine the IP that Oakley's got. You've got to try to work around. So the use of the shim in this allowed us to create both acknowledge the degraded properties of the material, but the use of the shim to push the pins out and also get around any IP that Oakley might have. And then this Sunglass Fix one, I've done the similar thing again, where this little chevron here is the hinge mechanism. So we would take any need from the material to deal with the mechanical properties, which is one of the big failings of non-glasses that aren't done in this way. Their failure point is the metal hinge. So a Silicon Valley worldview was move fast and break things, and a post-Silicon Valley worldview might be thinking about people as ancient beings. If you think about that longevity of humanity, you're probably not going to move fast and break things. A Silicon Valley worldview is active daily users, and then a post-Silicon Valley worldview might be noticing that people are sensitive to noise, texture, and speed of content, and that we might want to protect ourselves from the amount of noise in which we have to consume and overcome. I think a Silicon Valley worldview is a drive for convenience and efficiency. And I think a post-Silicon Valley worldview might be, it's impossible to waste time. I hear this expression, and I hear when people are spruiking AI systems, they go, oh, this thing is a waste of time. And I find myself thinking about it, go, how can you possibly waste time? We're just existing in time. It doesn't seem possible that you could waste it. This idea that we might want products that are pushing for convenience and efficiency, I think that's the opposite of that. And universalism is creating opportunity for individuals to exist located within physical communities. And I think that's the opposite thing we get from smart devices, which isolate us into smaller communities away from our physical communities. We can't do change or world building as individual designers or studios. We need a community of practice to have the authority and drive to maintain change. A community of practice looks like designers and studios working together as a conspiracy. And I love it. I love the idea of a design conspiracy, that we've got a common problem and we can conspire together to start to build this world that we want to live in.
Thanks for listening to this redacted special episode. We hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget to check the show notes for links to learn more about Andrew Simpson and Vert, where to follow Redacted, plus listen to more of our episodes. Thanks for listening, and until next time, this has been a redacted special episode.